morning.
Good morning.
Let me get set here. God, it's just amazing how God works and brings us all together, because I'm going to talk about intent, which you mentioned in your meditation, and stepping stones or baby steps like Bob talked about a few. It just, I did ask Lois to sing stepping stones, but it's just amazing how everything comes together. So Reverend Glenda asked me to speak about healing and to tell my story and how I viewed it and how I came through what I've come through so far and gotten to this place. But before I start, I want you to know I did not do it alone. God was there with me the entire time. Sometimes I didn't recognize him or her, whatever you want to identify it as. God was with me. And my peeps who have been with me on this healing process, and who have loved me when I couldn't love myself, who supported me, who listened to me, blah, 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 over and over and over. Thank you for being there. Okay, so healing is the topic. It's a big one. It was hard for me to narrow down exactly what I was going to talk about. So I started, I said, well, okay, I just got to go to the dictionary and find out what the heck is the definition of healing. And I came away with, healing is restoring or returning to purity and integrity. If you listened to Reverend Glenda a few weeks ago, she said the same thing. She said she got her definition from Mary Ann Williamson. I got mine from Webster's Dictionary, 1965. So with that in mind, I'm going to start by reinforcing some of the things that I've heard from right up here, because I have to agree with them. And I've only heard 3 speakers talking about wholeness and healing. The first one I heard was Stephen McAfee, who actually talked about wholeness. And he said, you're already whole. Your true self, your divine spirit is already whole. And sometimes we forget that. Your divine spirit does not need the healing. It's our human side that needs the healing. Because we are a divine spirit currently living in this human body. It's our human body that has all these emotions and this thinking and all the other stuff that makes us go crazy. So I say the same thing about healing. Your divine spirit is already healed. But our human needs the healing. Then I heard Glenda speak. She went into that definition, but she also talked about healing requires a change in our thinking, maybe a change in our belief system. And she talked about forgiveness, which I had to learn to do, to forgive. And when I started to work on forgiveness, I had to ask myself, am I a forgiving person? If I had to be honest with myself. I had to say no. No, I wasn't. But so how was I going to become a forgiving person? I turned to God and Jesus, Buddha, everybody I could think of to get their take on what forgiveness was. And what I realized is, for God, forgiveness is automatic. For Jesus, forgiveness is automatic. For Buddha, forgiveness is automatic. And for all those spiritual teachers out there, forgiveness is automatic. Whew! How could I make forgiveness automatic? But I've gotten there for the most part. Sometimes it might take me a little bit of time, but not long anymore. It doesn't mean I condone somebody's behavior or, want to be friends with them after what they've done, but they don't live in my head anymore. Because forgiveness is about us, not them. Slipped out of my mind. The other thing I have to say about forgiveness is because it is about them, it's not about me. I don't go up to somebody and say, Jane, will you forgive me? That puts her on the spot. If she doesn't say yes, she's going to feel guilty. Well, I don't want to make her feel guilty. So, if I'm asking forgiveness, I am saying that I did something wrong. I disappointed somebody, I hurt somebody, and man, I need to apologize. And so, I would say, Jane, I'm sorry. I apologize for what I did. My part is done. It's up to her to forgive. That's my take on forgiveness. Then there was Bob. Bob spoke about healing, and he talked about baby steps. We could always also call them stepping stones, but they're baby steps. Things that we put in front of us to take that step to move us forward. What I would like to say is, and since he said baby steps, he's saying it's a process. And I will add to that. Healing doesn't happen all at once, but it can happen in an instant. Let's say you have a cold. So I'm talking about your physical body that needs to be healed. And as my father always said, if you have a cold, it's going to last 7 days if you don't take anything. And if you take something, your cold's going to last a week. So, you have a cold, and you're miserable, and you're blowing your nose, and you're coughing, and you're doing all these things, and you're trying to heal yourself. And then one day you wake up, and you may be halfway through the day, and you say, I'm not coughing. I'm not blowing my nose. Instant healing. That's something on the physical sense. Okay, but there's other ways that healing happens in an instant, and I say they're baby steps, they're healing moments. So I was reading this book called Life 101 by John Roger. He made a statement. This is happening for you, not to you. How? Instant healing. It shifted me. It made me start to look at my experiences in a whole different light. This is happening for me, not to me. There are times that I have stewed and stewed and stewed and stewed about something. And finally I've just said, God, I can't do this anymore. I surrender. And whoo, the grace has just gone through me. Healing. Instant healing. So healing doesn't happen all at once, but it can happen in an instant, if you allow it. Okay, Bob said, he told this story. He said, I am not this story. And I'm about to tell mine. And I might have a few tears, but I want you to know the tears aren't about these events. My tears are me rejoicing on the healing that I have done or that I needed to do based on these events that happened to me or happened in my life. I want you to look at this story when I tell it and just imagine the healing that I had to do. But be prepared to rejoice in my healing with me. And also rejoice in the healing that you've already done in your life. So it's about rejoicing, not this tragedy. I vowed I would never tell this story again because I am not this story. So here I am. Be careful what you say because it's probably not true. Okay, so when I was 22, my older brother, who was 29, died of a gunshot wound. There was an inquest because there was a question about whether it was a suicide, an accidental death, or a homicide. It was ruled accidental. But in my mind, those other two things were there. He was married at the time he died. He had a wife named Dee. He had two young sons, Neil and Carl, who were 2 and 1 at the time. And they lived next door to my parents in the country in Illinois. So the relationship was very strong. Dee remarried to a man named John, and together they had a baby, Michelle. I considered them to be my sister-in-law and my brother-in-law because they were always there at my parents' house anytime I visited, whether it be a holiday or just a visit. And that's how I identified with them. My sister-in-law, my brother-in-law, and their baby Michelle was my niece. Family. When I was 30 years old, so the first event happened when I was 22, now I'm 30. John shot Dee. He turned the gun on one of my nephews, but the gun misfired. And Carl went out a window and Neil went out the door and got to my parents' house safely. But when they got help back into the room, back to the scene, he had stabbed the baby, Michelle, stabbed Dee, and then apparently got the gun to work because he shot himself. My sister-in-law lived for a couple of weeks on life support, But John and the baby, 18 months old, were dead at the scene. My brother's kids, Neil and Carl, were 9 and 10 at that time. When Neil and Carl were 15 and 16, they went swimming in a gravel pit where they shouldn't have been. That doesn't matter. And Neil drowned. And then when I was 40, my nephew Carl, who was living alone, came home to a burglary in progress in his home. 3 men were inside. He walked in, 2 of the guys ran out, and the 3rd one beat him to death with a baseball bat. It's hard to hear, isn't it? Sorry. But I want you to remember, I don't want you to get caught up in that. This talk is about healing. And the healing I have done. I've given you the headliners. There's a lot that goes around all of that. Obviously, I was devastated. And by each of these happenings, every one of them. And what I did is I allowed these experiences to claim me. They became my identity. You couldn't be my friend unless I told you my story, because how in the world were you ever going to understand me if you didn't know my story? But there are many people in here now that know me and haven't heard that story. They know me who I am now. But the result of that, of letting that claim me, is that it was downright impossible for me to have a healthy relationship with anyone, even my family, even my significant others at the time, even myself. I was not in a healthy relationship with anyone. One action I took to help me heal is I started to write. I'm going to share some of my writings today as I'm telling you my story. So this one I wrote. It says, the title of it is Disappeared. I was 30 years old the first time I disappeared. I didn't seem to have any control over it. My body just took over, protecting me from the pain. Oh, people could see me. I wasn't invisible, but really hadn't left physically. But my human soul had disappeared, left my body, went to rest somewhere else, leaving me a hollow shell, dead. At the time, my disappearance served a purpose. I couldn't feel the pain. Unfortunately, I couldn't feel the loving either. Couldn't receive the loving, couldn't believe the loving. I had disappeared from myself, walled off myself from the others. What a high price I paid just because I feared the pain. This little story speaks to some of the things I did to cope, and it speaks to me starting to come to an acceptance. This one was written in a writer's group I belong to. The facilitator would give us a sentence, and everybody had 20 minutes to write a story beginning with that sentence. And often my stories would be about me. So the first line that she gave us was, "That's just the way it was." That's just the way it was. No ifs, ands, or buts about it. Yes, yet she still couldn't believe it, didn't want to believe it, didn't think it was fair. She tried complaining about it, arguing about it, crying about it. She stewed about it, laid down on the floor and stomped her feet about it. She wrote 6 pages in her journal about it, then called 2 friends to talk about it. She drank a few beers to forget about it, more than a few. But that didn't change anything, because that's just the way it was. What kept me going? I have to say, I never lost faith in God. God was always there for me. I'm telling you, I mentioned it, that it's healing moments. One little healing moment at a time. Kept me going. Kept me taking those stepping stones and baby steps. One healing moment at a time. Sometimes it was something I said to myself. Sometimes it was me saying, I'm not going to believe that anymore. It does not serve me. Sometimes it was something I read, and sometimes it was the grace of God. There's one moment that doesn't seem like a healing moment, but in hindsight, it was. When my brother died. I was raised in the Methodist church. My mother didn't, took us to church, but I can't even tell you what the Methodists believed at this time. But I had a sister who became a fundamentalist, believing that the only way to heaven was to believe that Jesus Christ was your Savior. So what she said to me when my brother died was, Alan is in hell. Now, at the time, I didn't view that as a healing moment. But in hindsight, it moved me forward. I was not going to believe that. That belief system was going right out. Throw it out. Get rid of it. If I did not believe that, what was I going to believe? And so I started studying every major religion. What did they say happened to people after they died? And I came up with my own conclusion, which we won't talk about right now. Here's another one. After Carl's death, so he was the last one that died, I was living in Denver, and there was a grief education support group there. I called them up and said, I need help. I do want you to realize that when this started, these all events, when it happened when I was 22, there were no grief support groups. There were no books on grief. Nothing. This was a healing moment for me. I was seen when I went for the interview to see if I could get into the grief support group. I was 40 years old the first time I was seen. She said her name was Belle, and she asked me to sit down. I was nervous, knew I needed help, had sought it many times without success. I wasn't one to give up, and so I sat staring at the tall, red-headed woman. She sat down too, behind the desk, pen and paper in hand, ready to start the interview. "Tell me what happened," she said. "Tell me when it happened," she said. "Tell me how you are feeling," she said. She didn't ask about anyone else, not even my parents. She only asked about me. The fact was slowly growing into my consciousness. She was only asking about me. She didn't seem to notice that my smiling face didn't coincide with my words. She seemed to understand my performance, the Academy Award-winning performance that grievers like me are capable of. She didn't say much to me that day. She didn't give me advice. She didn't have to. What she gave me was a loving ear. What she gave me was permission to grieve, permission to be a griever. For the first time, on that very day, in that very hour, I had been seen for who I really was. I walked out of her office with hope, walked out knowing, without her saying it, that healing was a possibility. It wasn't until 2001, at the age of 54. Okay, so don't do the math, I'm 72 now. That I finally got serious about healing. Transforming myself, because if you think about it, when you heal, you are transforming yourself. And isn't that in our mission statement at Unity? We're helping each other transform, and that's where helping each other heal. I got serious about it in 2001. Why then? Well, I had a very close friend that I'd been with for years, and she quit speaking to me. When I asked her why, she said, "I can't deal with your anger anymore." And I said, "What? I'm a caring, compassionate woman. What are you talking about? Anger." And I came to realize that the way I perceived myself as a caring, compassionate woman and the way others were perceiving me were not in alignment. So it's time to do the work, because what I really wanted to do was to have people see me as a caring, compassionate woman and not an angry woman. I'll just let you know, I'm still working on that anger. Doesn't pop up as much, still working on it. I started on a threefold path to help me heal. One of part of that three-part is self-study. Studying yourself. To start that, I had to look at every part of my being. We're not just this physical being. I looked at my physical being. Anybody who's been through grief knows that grief takes a toll on us physically. Stomach pains, all kinds of things. Can't sleep, sleeps too much, whatever it is, it takes a toll. So I had to look at my physical. I'd self-study the physical and what I was doing to my body. I had to work on my imagination, because I have an imagination. If anybody has read the 4 Agreements,